At 15,000 feet over the Pacific, three men hunt a ghost they can't see. The sky is black, the ocean is black, and somewhere in all that darkness, a Japanese bomber is gliding toward thousands of sleeping Marines who have no idea death is coming. In the cockpit of a strange, heavy failed fighter, the brass never wanted a young American pilot wipes sweat from his palms and stares into nothing. In front of him, there's no moon, no stars, no silhouette of a target. Only a dim green radar screen and a quiet voice in his headset whispering, "Contact. Bearing 085. Range 12 miles." He doesn't know we're here. In the next 60 seconds, somebody's future ends. Either that bomber reaches the island, or this useless airplane proves every critic wrong in a burst of fire no one on the ground will ever see. If you're watching this right now, hit like, subscribe to WW2 Secrets, and tell me in the comments where you first heard about the Black Widow, or if this is the very first time its story has found you. 15,000 feet above the Pacific, the night doesn't just surround you, it swallows you whole. Out here, light has no meaning. Color disappears. Even sound feels thinner, like the air is holding its breath. Yet cutting through that endless black, two Pratt & Whitney radials roar like chained animals straining to break free. 4,000 horsepower, dragging a midnight black predator higher deeper into the dark. The crew of the P-61 Moonhappy feels every vibration through their bones as ground control crackles in their headsets. Moonhappy bogey, 12 o'clock, closing to 8 miles. There is no hesitation. The aircraft eases into a turn, wings slicing through the void. Somewhere ahead, invisible to the naked eye, a Japanese G-4M Betty bomber is threading its nightly path toward American positions, a ghost gliding toward men asleep on Guadalcanal, unaware that fate is already negotiating their tomorrow. The Betty's crew thinks the night is their ally. They think darkness is protection. They have no idea that tonight, the darkness belongs to someone else. Because trailing them is something the world had never truly seen before. A fighter built not around speed, nor maneuverability, but around vision, electronic sight that pierced night itself. The Northrop P-61 Black Widow. Twin-engine, three-man crew wings, as broad as a small house, and lodged in its nose a radar set that turned the world into a map of glowing echoes. It didn't matter if clouds hid the moon, or if the sea returned no reflection. If you moved, the P-61 sensed you. If you ran, it followed. But back in Washington, the men with stars on their collars had mocked it. Too heavy. Too slow. A waste of resources. They worshipped the sleek British Mosquito wooden lightning fast, a miracle in European skies. Compared to that elegant Predator, the P-61 was a hulking shadow with none of the glamour. But war has never been impressed by glamour. On nights like this, over forgotten patches of ocean practicality, decides who lives long enough to see sunrise. Inside, Moonhappy Lieutenant Herman Ernst grips the controls, sweat collecting under his gloves. The cockpit smells of heated metal gun oil and tropical air funneled in through vents. Behind him, radar operator Edward Kopsel is curled over the eerie green glow of the SCR-720's cathode ray tube. Tiny electronic ghosts shimmy across the screen, each one a real aircraft, each one a potential killer or victim. In the top turret, Staff Sergeant Raymond Mooney steadies his hands near the triggers of 450 caliber Brownings, the final word in this midnight conversation. Three men alone in an ocean of darkness. And yet somehow, they can see farther than anyone has ever seen at night. Still, the doubts whispered back home cling to them like humidity. Ernst remembers the Pentagon briefing only weeks earlier. The raised voices, the charts, the accusations you're sending crews into flying coffins. Why build this monster when the Mosquito already exists? But Jack Northrop had insisted the aircraft needed size, not for comfort or vanity, but for fuel, for stability, for radar space. For the long Pacific nights when a fighter had to fly for hours over empty black water, searching for a single, solitary speck of danger. Tonight is exactly the kind of night Northrop designed this aircraft for. Another call comes through Copsil's headset. Contact steady, bearing 085, altitude 18,000. He's running between two storm cells. The Betty is committed to its bombing run. It can't see the hunter behind it. It can't hear the approach. And Ernst knows if the bomber reaches Henderson Field, if even one torpedo or bomb gets through Marines, will die in their sleep. He pushes the throttles forward. The superchargers whine, feeding compressed air into the engines until the radials scream with renewed strength. The P-61 climbs nose, rising into the thinning tropical air. The fuel gauges dip, but that doesn't matter now. Range is why they're here. Endurance is why the P-61 exists. 8 miles. 6. 4. The Pacific night tightens like a snare. Below them, the sea is nothing but a vast sheet of ink. Above them, clouds rumble with distant lightning. And ahead, still invisible to the naked eye, a bomber carries death toward American shores. But death has no monopoly on the night. Not anymore. Moon-Happy cuts through the darkness like a blade dipped in ink. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Hermann Ernst can feel the weight of more than just altitude pressing on his chest. It's the kind of pressure no oxygen mask can fix, the pressure of expectation, of doubt, of being the pilot of an aircraft that half the Air Force thinks never should have been built. The tropical night over Guadalcanal wraps itself around the P-61 thick and wet, like a blanket soaked in heat. Ernst wipes a line of sweat from his eyebrow, then settles deeper into his seat, the hum of instrumentation steady beneath his fingertips. Every switch, every tremor, every sound feels amplified. Out here at night, the smallest mistake is fatal, not because the enemy will kill you, but because the ocean below doesn't give back survivors. A faint glow pulses behind him. Lieutenant Edward Copsil, radar operator, sits hunched over the SCR-720, its green phosphor glow painting ghostly light across his face. His fingers move in precise motions, adjusting gain, refining sweep, interpreting the faint, electronic whispers that most men wouldn't even know how to read. To Copsil, they're not static. They're the shape of the sky. They're information. They're life. In the dorsal turret above Staff Sergeant Raymond Mooney rests both hands near the handles of his 4 Browning 50 caliber machine guns. He's the quietest of the three, the one who never complains, the one who smokes a single cigarette before every sortie, always at the same spot on the tarmac, always with the same slow exhale. A small superstition in a war built on routine chaos and chance. Tonight, he'd crushed the cigarette under his boot, tapped the metal of the turret twice with his knuckles, and climbed aboard. The 3 men share no small talk. They don't need to. A night fighter crew communicates more with silence than words. Silence. And the soft beeps, hums, and murmurs of a machine designed for only one thing: finding death in the dark. Back in Washington, the men who rejected the P-61 never saw what these 3 see every night. They never felt the cockpit walls vibrating at full power. They never smelled the mix of fuel oil and jungle air. They never sat in a seat knowing radar contact could disappear in an instant if you climbed too fast or turned too wide. General Hoyt Vandenberg's voice echoes in Ernst's memory. Too heavy. Too slow. A flying coffin. We could give them mosquitoes instead. The British Mosquito, elegant, wooden, impossibly fast, was every officer's dream solution. 13,000 pounds empty. 400 miles per hour. A legend. Ernst had immense respect for it. Hell, every pilot did. But the Pacific was not England. These were not the short, sharp raids over Europe. Out here, a pilot might spend 4 hours over water without seeing a thing. Out here, range mattered more than glamour. Stability mattered more than speed. Jack Northrop had known that. He'd built the P-61 around a single philosophy no one else had dared embrace. Night is its own battlefield, and it needs its own weapon. The twin-boom configuration wasn't style. It was a necessity. It put the engines far apart, minimizing asymmetry if one died. It gave the radar a whole nose to itself. It made room for fuel the Mosquito could never carry. A fighter built for the dark, not the day. Ernst adjusts his grip on the control column. Moon-Happy's engines vibrate through his arms like a heartbeat. Behind him, Kopsel murmurs a quiet status update. Voice: steady calm, clinical. Mooney's turret shifts with a soft mechanical whir. The whole aircraft feels alive, a living creature with 3 minds, 3 sets of instincts, 3 sets of fears. Then the radio crackles sharp and urgent. Moon-Happy Vector 090. Climb to Angels 20. Ernst acknowledges, pulling the nose upward. The aircraft rises smoothly, wings, steady, engines responding without hesitation. This is the moment the mission truly begins. The moment thought turns to action, doubt turns to intent, fear turns to focus. Whatever Washington thinks of the P-61 doesn't matter now. Whatever the critics believe doesn't matter now. All that matters is the ghost ahead of them, and whether they will catch it before it reaches the men sleeping helplessly on the island below. The order comes down like a needle through the night, bogey inbound from Rabaul. Likely a Betty-class bomber. Possible ordnance for Henderson Field. There it is, the shape of the threat. A lone bomber flying low and steady, the kind of harassment mission the Japanese have repeated for months. 1 plane, 1 payload, dropped on an island where thousands of exhausted men try to sleep between artillery echoes and malaria chills. Previous attempts to intercept these night raids had failed. P-38s, fitted with makeshift radar pods. Hellcats guided by ground control. It didn't matter. The enemy always vanished, dipped behind terrain, dove into cloud banks, played hide-and-seek with the limitations of early radar. But tonight, things are different. Tonight, the hunter carries its own eyes. Kopsel leans closer to the glowing screen lips, parting slightly as the signal sharpens. His fingers move over dials like a pianist, coaxing music from an unfamiliar instrument. Gain down, sweep narrowed, altitude filtered. Then a single bright return holds steady. Not noise, not weather, not a ghost. Contact bearing 085, range 12 miles, Angels 18, heading south-southeast. He's running the slot between 2 storm cells. There's a thin thread of excitement in his voice, barely audible, quickly swallowed by professionalism. To most airmen, this would be a miracle, seeing the unseen. To a radar operator, it's an art form practiced in the dark, where every echo, every flicker, every blip must be deciphered with absolute conviction. Ernst pushes the throttles forward. The twin superchargers respond instantly, screaming as they force compressed air into each R-2800 engine. The cockpit hum deepens into a physical vibration that runs through his elbows and spine. Moon-Happy begins to climb, banking softly to intercept. Up here, the night feels like a living thing, a heavy, endless mass pressing against the canopy. The Pacific is a void beneath them, a matte black sheet broken only by distant lightning flickers inside rolling storm towers. It's the kind of night where the horizon disappears, and a pilot could flip upside down without realizing it. But Ernst isn't flying blind. Not tonight. The Betty's pilot, somewhere ahead, is tracing his course by dead reckoning and stars blurred behind drifting cloud. He has no inkling that American radar has been tracking him since he crossed the 100-mile line. He doesn't know that every mile he flies forward brings him closer to an invisible predator, sliding into position behind him. Kopsel whispers, range 10, steady, speed unchanged. He doesn't know we're here. Of course he doesn't. That is the point. That is the essence of night fighting. Ernst had studied German night fighter tactics, reading how Luftwaffe crews stalked RAF bombers over Europe. Darkness is a weapon. Surprise is the kill shot. And the approach, the unseen, unheard glide into firing range, is where battles are won long before guns speak. The P-61 continues its climb, leveling off below the target's altitude. Ernst eases the throttles back, just a hair, avoiding the dreaded overshoot, the cardinal sin of night interception. Speed is not his ally. Patience is. Precision is. Radar is. The fuel gauges inch downward, with the agonizing certainty of time passing. The Pacific demands endurance. The Black Widow was built for endurance. Slowly, silently, the gap closes. 8 miles. 7. 6. Somewhere up ahead, the Betty floats in total ignorance, its engines droning a lullaby meant to soothe its crew through another long night. But in the P-61's cockpit, the world grows sharper, tighter, more focused. Copsel's voice is the only thing that moves 5 miles. Target steady. Mooney shifts in the turret, the motors humming softly. One hand hovers near the firing mechanism, the other steadying himself against the turret frame. He doesn't see the bomber yet. None of them do, but he can feel it approaching. It's like a sixth sense among night fighter crews, the moment when the enemy's presence becomes real, even before visible form emerges. Ernst breathes deeply, once, then twice. His pulse is steady, his grip firm. The Black Widow responds to every micro-adjustment like a patient hunter. Then Copsel murmurs softer this time, almost reverent. 3 miles, closing perfectly. Stay on this line. Somewhere ahead beyond the dark and cloud and fear, the bomber flies blind into its final minute of life. Tonight, in this thin slice of sky, the P-61 is exactly what Northrop promised. It would be a shadow with eyes. The moment Ernst squeezes the trigger, the night answers. Not with thunder. Thunder is too slow, but with a brutal flash of white-orange tearing across the void. 8 guns erupt together, 4 20mm Hispano cannons, and 4 50-caliber Brownings, a single concentrated burst, meant not to scare or wound, but to end. Downrange, the Betty flares into existence like a dying star. Flames blossom along the wings, tracing the fuel tanks racing toward the engines. A second later, the bomber rolls inverted trailing fire like a comet, shedding its last shimmering tail. Then it drops. A slow, helpless spiraling fall, and below the Pacific swallows the explosion whole. The men inside the Betty will never know who killed them. They will never know how close they came to reaching Henderson Field, or how many sleeping Marines would have died if they'd made it. Up in the turret, Mooney exhales a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Copsel leans back from the radar, the green glow still flickering across his face, as if waiting for the ghost he'd been tracking to reappear. It doesn't. And Ernst, he doesn't cheer. He doesn't fist pump or grin. He simply watches the burning wreckage fade into nothing, knowing that this silent, unseen kill is what the P-61 was born to do. It's a strange kind of victory, a lonely one, but it's pure. Because the Black Widow wasn't built for dogfights or air shows. It wasn't built to impress the generals in daylight demonstrations. It was built for this, the precise moment when a predator finds its prey in the dark and erases it before dawn ever knows anything happened. Down on Guadalcanal, Marines roll over in their sleep, unaware that the threat meant to wake them never came. A radar operator in a humid bunker scratches his head at the sudden disappearance of a contact. A young corporal on guard duty glimpses a faint flicker in the sky and wonders if lightning is playing tricks. The war is full of battles no one sees. This was one of them. And as Moonhappy turns back toward base banking, away from the glowing sea, where the bomber vanished, Ernst allows himself one quiet thought. Northrop was right. The critics were wrong. The Black Widow works. By early July 1944, that truth begins spreading far beyond the humid islands of the Pacific. The first operational P-61 squadrons take their places on opposite sides of the world. On Guadalcanal, the 6th Night Fighter Squadron hides their black-painted aircraft under heavy camouflage netting, each widow resting beneath palm fronds, like some nocturnal beast waiting for dusk. Meanwhile, across an ocean and half a continent, the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron settles into Scorton Airfield in Yorkshire, preparing for the kind of night battles only Europe can produce. Crowded skies radar clutter the constant hum of activity from dozens of airfields. 2 theaters, 2 completely different wars, 1 aircraft trying to prove it belongs in both. The lessons start coming fast. In the Pacific Range is life. Crews fly endless hours over water, searching for single bombers, daring enough to slip through the dark. In Europe, the P-61 faces a different challenge: formations of German transports, reconnaissance aircraft, sneaking across the front lines, and most notoriously, the V-1 flying bombs, fast, small, relentless. And that's where the critics sharpen their knives again. July 15th, over the English Channel, Lieutenant Robert Anderson pushes his Black Widow to catch a V-1 screaming toward London. His radar operator, Sergeant William Hayes, lines up the perfect intercept geometry, flawless timing, razor thin. But the V-1 flies at 350 mph, and the P-61 can barely match it even in a shallow dive. Then the nose begins to tremble. The plexiglass radar housing flexes, then cracks, then shatters inward. Wind tears through the front of the aircraft. The radar dies. Control becomes a wrestling match. They fire one burst, a desperate attempt, but the V-1 continues on, implacable, until it disappears toward the city. Anderson limps home with a gaping hole where the P-61's eyes should be. For the critics, this is fuel. For the crews, it's a reminder the Black Widow is powerful, but not invincible. Yet even as doubters grumble in briefing rooms thousands of miles away, the men who actually fly the P-61 know the truth. Night fighting is not about speed. It's not about glamour. It's about who can find whom first, and who can fire only once. In the dark, a single mistake means death. But tonight, over the Pacific, the Black Widow made none. By late summer 1944, the night logs begin to tell a different story, one written not in triumph or tragedy, but in quiet, relentless consistency. Night after night in the Pacific, the P-61s of the 6th Night Fighter Squadron rise into the dark and come back with another mark on their fuselages. 17 confirmed kills in just a few weeks. 17 bombers that never make it to their targets. 17 nights where the Black Widow becomes the final word between danger and survival. The formula is always the same approach: from below, stay in the blind spot, remain invisible until the last moment. The radar guides them. The twin boom silhouette breaks up their own signature on enemy detection equipment. And by the time any Japanese pilot realizes what's happening, the guns are already speaking. But the war is changing in ways the aircraft cannot control. Across the world in Europe, the 422nd and 425th Night Fighter Squadrons are discovering a different kind of battlefield. Western Europe's skies in 1944 are crowded friendlies, foes, transports, pathfinders, bombers, even stragglers limping home alone. It's a world of radio chatter, overlapping radar nets, and ground controllers juggling dozens of vectors at once. Intercepts must be perfect. Firing windows are seconds long. A mistake means hitting the wrong plane, or being hit by one. In that chaos, the Black Widow adapts. It has to. But what the P-61 faces next isn't a bomber at all. It's a weapon. The V-1. Fast, small, heartless. Designed to destroy cities, not survive dogfights. The men who fly Black Widows in Europe quickly realize the truth. The P-61 wasn't built to chase something that doesn't care if it's being chased. The Widow can catch a bomber that's trying to live, but it cannot outsprint a missile trying only to die on target. The speed critics complained about in Washington becomes painfully real over the channel. And yet, that limitation barely matters elsewhere. In the Pacific, the Black Widow's true battlefield, the nights remain long and the targets remain human. Japanese bombers fly low and predictable, often alone, sometimes in pairs, relying on night and ocean to shield them. They don't know American radar has advanced beyond anything they imagine. They don't know the Widow's crew can see through storm cells and moonless skies. The diary entries from these squadrons read almost serene hunts in blackness, patient pursuit, short bursts of gunfire deciding a night's fate. But beneath that calm is a growing tension neither pilots nor generals can ignore. The better the P-61 performs, the fewer targets appear. By autumn 1944, Japanese night raids dwindle. The Widow isn't just killing bombers, it's killing the strategy itself. Why send harassment raids when none return? Why risk planes you can no longer replace? Even so, the pilots, sense the shift. Ernst feels it. Kendall feels it. Every radar operator scanning empty skies feels it. They fly long missions now, hours over ocean, chasing faint radar whispers that vanish into nothing. Sometimes the only contacts they see are weather fronts or American planes far outside their flight paths. Crews return to base with the same ammunition they left with, and each uneventful landing fuels a quiet question. Are we becoming victims of our own success? Then comes the arrival of Captain Lee Kendall to the Pacific. The man who hunted German aircraft from French skies now brings European discipline into a theater that fought a different kind of night war. His plane, christened Lady in the Dark, becomes something whispered about in mess tents, a widow with a crew that can wait longer, close quieter, and strike with near clinical patience. Kendall teaches what European skies taught him: do not rush, ever. An approach rushed is a kill lost, and a kill lost means a bomber reaches its target. In late September, around Iwo Jima, Japanese crews begin borrowing evasion tactics learned from the European theater: sudden altitude drops, sweeping reversals, random zigzags to break radar lock. Tactics born in foggy English nights now drift across Pacific clouds. But the P-61's radar range 16 miles, and the discipline of its crews nullify the tricks. The Widow doesn't chase. It recalculates. It reacquires. It waits. Firepower does the rest. And by October 1944, the numbers don't lie. Modified day fighters used for night work produce scattered, inconsistent results. Black Widows produce kills, steady kills, clean kills, kills that reshape operational doctrine. But strategy has its own momentum, and war is not a neat equation. By November, Luftwaffe night operations are collapsing. Japanese airfields capable of night bombing are being swallowed by American offensives. The sky, once crowded with enemies, begins to empty. And for the first time, the pilots of the P-61 begin to feel a quiet, bitter irony sinking in. They have become too effective for their own relevance. Night by night, mission by mission, the Black Widow has hunted the darkness so well that the darkness now holds no prey. The most advanced night fighter of the war has reached its peak at the exact moment the enemy begins disappearing from the sky. A perfect tool built for a vanishing war. The last summer of the war arrives not with thunder or fire, but with a strange and unsettling quiet. By August 1945, most Japanese night raids have faded into memory. Their airfields are either bombed-out craters or little more than desperate strips run by exhausted crews with failing aircraft. The Pacific, once a hunting ground, filled with echoes of engines, now stretches empty and silent beneath the wings of the P-61. But war has a way of reserving its sharpest blade for the very end. In the early hours of August 14, 1945, Captain Lee Kendall and his crew climb into Lady in the Dark for what they expect will be another long, uneventful patrol. The sun hasn't even thought about rising, and the sky over Okinawa is stacked in layers of cloud, thick, slow-moving heavy, with the weight of a war almost finished. Kendall knows the routine. 6 hours of monotony, 6 hours of scanning nothing, 6 hours of proving readiness in a war where the enemy no longer shows up. But halfway through the patrol, the headset crackles to life. Lady in the Dark, we have a contact, northwest approach, vector 270. A contact. At this stage in the war, it's like hearing a ghost whisper your name. Kendall's eyes sharpen. Copsel, experienced now, steady as stone, leans closer to his radar screen. The blip is faint, slipping between cloud layers, but definitely real. A twin-engine aircraft descending slowly toward Okinawa's airfields. Intelligence had warned that Japanese officers might attempt a last-minute flight to negotiate terms or escape. Or perhaps a reconnaissance mission. Or perhaps a final strike from a pilot who couldn't accept defeat. Whatever this contact is, it cannot be ignored. As Lady in the Dark closes the distance, the weather tightens around them. Wind buffets the wings. Rain streaks across the canopy. Lightning flashes somewhere far behind the clouds, illuminating the Widow's black paint for a heartbeat at a time. Copsel murmurs, updates 12 miles, 10, 9, until at 8 miles, the radar return steadies clear and unmistakable. A twin-engine Dina Kendall mutters. A long-range Japanese reconnaissance aircraft. Fast, nimble, and flying straight toward American-controlled territory. Standard doctrine says visual identification must come first, but the night offers no kindness. Clouds swallow everything. The horizon is gone. The only light comes from distant lightning and the faint glow of instruments. At 800 yards, a silhouette finally materializes, fragile, angular, almost peaceful in its steady glide. Kendall sees navigation lights on. No evasive maneuvers. No sudden dives. It looks friendly. It looks harmless. It looks wrong. Because this is war. And in war, nothing that looks harmless ever truly is. Kendall steadies his breath. The responsibility sits on him alone. No general, no committee, no protocol can make this decision for him. His finger hovers over the firing control as he lines up the optimal attack angle. For a fleeting second, he hesitates. A heartbeat. A single breath. The last breath those men in the Dina will ever take if he is wrong. Then training takes over. Instinct. Discipline. The cold, clinical understanding that hesitation kills more pilots than bullets. He fires. 3 seconds. That's all it takes. A single burst that rips through the Dina's fuselage, igniting fuel and shattering metal. The aircraft disintegrates instantly, erupting into a fireball that paints the clouds in violent orange. Debris scatters across the ocean like sparks from a dying star. Then the sky returns to black as if nothing had ever happened. Back at base, the crew files their report in silence. No celebration, no cheers, no satisfaction. Just procedure. Just the routine of men who have done their jobs too many times to mistake killing for glory. Hours later, the radio brings news that changes everything. Emperor Hirohito has announced Japan's surrender. The war is over. Completely. Irrevocably. And the aircraft Lady in the Dark destroyed that morning. It was carrying Japanese naval personnel, attempting to open channels for surrender negotiations. A victory that wasn't meant to be a victory at all. A necessary action that leaves no one feeling triumphant. In the cold light of hindsight, the kill becomes a tragic footnote, one of the war's last sharpest ironies. The Black Widow, designed to own the night, claimed the final air-to-air victory of World War II by striking the very people trying to end it. But war never writes clean endings. Statistics begin to roll in over the following days. 127 enemy aircraft destroyed. 18 V-1 flying bombs neutralized. Even a rogue B-29 intercepted while drifting unattended over Iwo Jima. And many other kills lost forever to the Pacific, where wreckage sinks before anyone can confirm it. Yet these numbers are more than tallies. They're proof of a doctrine reborn. Proof that the darkness can be mastered. Proof that a useless airplane became the weapon no one expected, the one that changed the rules of night warfare forever. The sky grows quiet after August 14th. But for the men who flew the P-61, the silence is not peace. It's a reminder of everything they fought to prevent, everything they destroyed, and everything they saved. The war may have ended in a single radio transmission, but the future of the P-61 Black Widow did not. When the guns fell silent, another kind of battle began, one fought not in the skies over the Pacific or Europe, but in fluorescent-lit conference rooms of Washington, D.C., where men in starched uniforms and polished shoes prepared to judge an aircraft they had never flown. In September 1945, Lieutenant Herman Ernst finds himself sitting at a long wooden table before a War Department evaluation board. The room smells of paper ink and bureaucratic certainty. Charts hang on the walls. A row of generals and civilian analysts sit across from him, their notepads ready, their expressions stiff and unreadable. Most of them have never stepped foot in a night fighter. Most have never flown in total darkness with only a radar screen to tell them which way death is coming from. Most have only seen war through reports, maps, and tidy little arrows, showing movements made by men whose faces they never knew. But today, these same men will decide whether the aircraft that saved thousands of American lives was a brilliant investment or a costly mistake. Ernst begins his testimony quietly, with the calm of someone who has nothing left to prove. He describes what the numbers cannot capture, the kills that left no debris, the bombers that vanished from radar after a burst of fire over open ocean, the raids that simply stopped happening because the enemy learned the P-61 was waiting in the dark. But the board keeps coming back to the same points: cost, speed, complexity, maintenance hours. They question whether a specialized night fighter was necessary when faster day fighters existed. They point again and again to the Mosquito, the darling of European night combat. They raise eyebrows at the P-61's weight, its price, its unconventional design. They discuss the aircraft as if it were a ledger entry, not the machine that men trusted with their lives. Then, Jack Northrop himself enters the room, calm, precise, unshakably confident. He explains the twin-boom configuration, the radar nose, the fuel capacity. He lays out in clinical detail why the Mosquito could not survive Pacific operations, why P-38s with radar pods were inherently unstable, and why single-engine fighters with external radar were a compromise doomed from the start. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The truth doesn't require shouting. Then comes Captain Edward Kopsel, no longer just a radar operator, but a teacher of the craft. He breaks down the SCR-720 system, the training pipeline that turned raw recruits into operators who could read a sky of electronic ghosts. He explains how a three-man crew isn't redundant. It's necessary. Night fighting demands simultaneous mastery of radar interpretation, navigation, communication, and combat maneuvering. "Show me the pilot who can do all that at once," he says quietly, "and I'll show you a man who won't live long." For a moment, the room goes still. By the end of the hearings, the board acknowledges the Black Widow's effectiveness. But they cannot ignore the shifting winds of strategy. The war ended too soon for the P-61 to demonstrate its full potential. Too few targets remained. Too few missions were left to justify the cost. Their conclusion is diplomatic, almost polite. The P-61 was effective, but its strategic value was short-lived. A bureaucratic verdict, an incomplete truth. Because history wasn't finished with the Black Widow. As the Cold War dawns, a new fear spreads across the American defense establishment: Soviet long-range bombers capable of delivering nuclear weapons. Suddenly, night interception, all-weather radar control, and long-range patrols transform from niche tasks into the backbone of continental defense. And the lessons of the P-61, they become gospel. Air Defense Command begins shaping new interceptors around the principles the Widow taught them: twin engines for safety over long distances, two-seat crews for workload distribution, powerful integrated radar systems, ground control, intercept coordination, weapons powerful enough to kill in a single strike. Northrop's F-89 Scorpion emerges directly from this lineage. Lockheed's F-94 Starfire follow suit. The blueprint for modern night interception, radar-first crew, intensive technology-driven, begins with the P-61's shadow. Meanwhile, Ernst, now a colonel in the Air Force Reserve, spends his post-war career shaping doctrine. He tests early jet interceptors, refining tactics that fuse radar teamwork and precision. He pushes for specialized training programs, insisting that night fighting is not a skill, it's a discipline. Kopsel becomes a consultant for Westinghouse, applying his combat experience to design radar systems that real operators can understand under stress. He has one rule: if a tired young man in a shaking cockpit at 20,000 feet can't use it, it doesn't matter how advanced it is. Northrop uses everything learned from the P-61 wiring, radar layouts, crew, ergonomics, even lessons about airflow and nose design to win Cold War contracts. The company's archives become a treasure trove of hard-earned knowledge no competitor can match. And Kendall, he returns to civilian flying, but remains a quiet presence in military advisory groups. He warns designers that range and endurance matter more than glossy performance charts. He knows the truth: an interceptor that cannot stay awake with the night is no interceptor at all. By 1960, analysts studying air defense doctrine begin to recognize a pattern, a straight lineage from the Black Widow to every modern interceptor patrolling the skies. The P-61 didn't just fight in World War II. It taught the world how to fight in every war that followed. Night no longer belongs to those who hide in it. Night belongs to those who can see through it. The P-61 proved that first. When historians look back on World War II, they often focus on the glamorous machines, the Mustangs, the Spitfires, the B-17s, that filled newsreels and postcards. But the true revolution of air combat didn't happen in daylight. It happened in the quiet hours, in the invisible battles fought by crews who learned to trust glowing green radar echoes more than their own eyes. And it began with a black, heavy, unnecessary fighter, built by a stubborn engineer who believed darkness itself could be conquered. By 1946, the war is over, but the P-61 story is still unfolding. The aircraft that once hunted bombers now sits on airfields, waiting for its next purpose. For men like Herman Ernst, now a colonel in the Air Force Reserve, the post-war years become a new battlefield. Ernst helps test America's first generation of jet-powered night interceptors. He sees the same fear and the same resistance he witnessed in the P-61's infancy. Too slow, too complicated, too specialized. He smiles quietly. He's heard it all before. In every briefing room, he repeats the same lesson: technology doesn't win the fight. Training and discipline do. A radar is useless unless the operator knows how to read it under pressure. A fast jet is pointless if its crew can't stay coordinated in the dark. Night warfare demands humility and patience. Edward Kopsel, now a technical consultant for Westinghouse, becomes one of the unsung architects of the Cold War. Gone is the cramped SCR-720 he once hunched over. Now he helps build radars with clearer displays, smarter filters, simpler controls. But he never lets the engineers forget the truth of combat. A radar must match the human mind, not overwhelm it. If a man with shaking hands can't use it, he says it isn't a weapon. It's a liability. That philosophy becomes foundational in designing the radars that guide America's jets through the tense nights of the 1950s and 60s nights, when Soviet bombers probe Arctic air corridors and interceptor crews sleep in flight suits. Jack Northrop, meanwhile, continues his obsession with innovation. The twin boom ideas, the ergonomic layouts, the radar integration challenges he solved with the P-61 become part of the company's DNA. The archives of the Black Widow program, filled with handwritten notes, flight data, operator critiques, combat reports, guide the development of jets like the F-89 Scorpion and influence even the earliest concepts behind airborne early warning aircraft. And somewhere far from the design rooms and meeting halls, Lee Kendall lives a quieter life. He flies civilian routes, teaches young pilots, and occasionally visits Air Force bases to evaluate new interceptors destined for the Arctic defense line. His advice is simple, practical, and born from long nights spent over empty water range, wins wars of distance. Comfort wins wars of endurance. Young engineers look at him strangely. Talking about comfort in a warplane seems absurd to them. But Kendall remembers the 6-hour patrols, the silent cockpits, the loneliness of the night sky. He knows crew fatigue can kill as effectively as any enemy fighter. Then, as the jet age advances, a quiet realization spreads among military analysts. The P-61 wasn't just a machine. It was a blueprint. A blueprint for two-seat interceptors. A blueprint for integrated radar doctrine. A blueprint for all-weather, all-night air defense. A blueprint for a world where information matters more than raw speed. The Black Widow had proven a truth the world would spend decades learning. In modern war, the one who sees first wins. By 1960, strategists examining Cold War air defenses can trace nearly every major doctrine back to the lessons carved into night skies between 1944 and 1945. The system's approach, radar plus crew plus airframe plus ground control, starts with the P-61. Even the earliest concepts of AWACS airborne radar command posts owe something to the idea that aircraft should carry their own eyes into battle. And the philosophical legacy. It lives in every pilot who flies into darkness, trusting instruments more than vision. In every radar operator who guides a jet toward an enemy it cannot yet see. In every interceptor designed not to dogfight, but to kill in the unseen spaces between dusk and dawn. Today, the surviving P-61s sit quietly in museums. Their black paint has faded. Their once revolutionary radars are relics. Tourists walk past them with casual curiosity. But if you stand beneath its broad wings, its twin booms, its hollow radar nose, and you close your eyes, you might hear it again, the steady hum of two big radials. The whisper of a radar operator calling out range and bearing. The heartbeat of three men alone in the dark staring into the void waiting for a blip on a screen to turn into life or death. A machine once called unnecessary became the weapon that changed the night. The men who flew it knew the truth. Victory doesn't always come from what shines in daylight. Sometimes it comes from what watches in silence and strikes before it is ever seen. There's something about the Black Widow that stays with me long after the history books close. Maybe it's the irony, a machine dismissed as unnecessary, becoming one of the most decisive weapons of the night. Or maybe it's the human part of the story. Three men alone in a cockpit, trusting a flickering radar screen, more than their own eyes, carrying the weight of thousands of sleeping lives below them. To me, the P-61 isn't just an aircraft. It's a reminder that innovation is often born in silence, in defiance, and in places where no one is looking. And sometimes, the things we underestimate end up shaping the future in ways we never expect. If this story moved you the way it moved me, consider subscribing to WW2 Secrets. There are so many forgotten corners of this war still waiting to be explored together.